Welcome back to my channel. Today I will show you an action, survival and drama movie called The Edge, released in 1997. The movie opens in a Canadian airfield. Charles Morse, a brilliant man and a billionaire, comes out of his airplane with his employees and his wife, who is a young model named Mickey. He walks over to the hangar and the aircraft mechanic admires his $20 million airplane. Charles mistook him for talking about his wife. Only then the mechanic realizes that he was talking to a billionaire. Charles and his friends are going up the mountains to a remote cabin to do a photo shoot for his wife. His employee tells him that he has checked the small amphibian and it is good condition and advises not to fly near flocks of birds or ice. The plane takes off and Charles opens his present from his secretary because he loves to read books. His friends in the plane includes Bob the photographer, his assistant Stephen, Charles's secretary Harriet, and some others. As the amphibian lands on the lake, the cabin owner stands to greet them. The cabin is a wonder made purely of traditional oak. As they enter, the owner instructs them that the kitchen is always open, the bedrooms and outhouses are upstairs. Bob admires a photo frame of a native. The owner says he is Jack Huck, a friend of mine. And I'd be out hunting with him right now if you folks weren't here, and I couldn't get my rifle sighted in. Charles is over by the books when the owner asks if he interested in books. Charles says yes and says an ironing board would make a good bench rest for your rifle. The owner says he is surprised that he even knows what a bench rest is. Then Mickey, his wife, claims that Charles is very smart and he knows everything. You have a question, ask him. Mickey tells the owner that he can't stump him. The owner bets otherwise. Then he bets him $5 if he can tell him what is on the other side of the paddle blade. Charles, without hesitation, says that it's a rabbit smoking a pipe. The owner is amazed as he was right and turns the blade. He hands Charles $5. Charles thanks him. Bob claps for him and asks why is that. Charles says it's a symbol of the Cree Indian. On one side a panther and the other a rabbit smoking a pipe, and afraid because he is smarter than the panther. The owner then goes on to tell the guests that we have a problem with bears around these parts. Never leave food uncovered even in the lodge. If you see a bear, stand still. Let him know that you know, that he sees you. Then back up real slow. Mickey says she is going to bed and Bob whispers something in her ear and she says shut up. Charles saw it but gave a suspicious look. At night, in their room, Mickey tells Charles that, you are always reading. That's why I married you, because you're the smartest person I know. And Charles tells him that she is the only woman he has ever wanted. This is a special day for me, don't you know that? She tells him that she is very glad he gets to come away with the group. She asks him to go make her a sandwich downstairs. Charles walks down the wooden stairs with the lamp and goes into the kitchen. He looks around and grabs some food to make a sandwich. He hears a window screech behind him and turns around. He notices that the window was open and the meat was left uncovered. He remembers the owner's warning and tries to quickly finish up. Paranoid of a bear attack at any moment, he rushes with the sandwich to the door only to be met by a giant grizzly. He shouts for his life and falls to the floor only to then realize it was Bob in a bear skin. The whole team staged everything to give a big scare. They yelled surprise and wished him happy birthday. As they sang the birthday song for, he was still recovering from the shock and his wife comes and hugs and kisses him. Bob says he's sorry while laughing. They all opened champagne bottles and poured for everyone. Bob made a speech saying thank you for your good nature, your intelligence, and your generosity. Forgive us for this charade. His wife gives him a wrapped present. It was a pocket watch and it has an engraving saying to my beloved husband on his birthday, from the luckiest woman in the world. Bob hands him a wrapped present too and it was a pocket knife. Charles thanks him. The cabin owner says give him a coin. It is a superstition that when someone gives you a knife, give him a coin or it cuts the friendship. Then everyone wished him happy birthday and left for their rooms. In the morning, Bob was taking pictures of Mickey wearing Indian attire. She does different poses. Charles watches from the balcony while reading his book. She makes little corny jokes to Bob and he replies and quickly kissed her on the shoulder and Charles notices. Mickey air kisses Charles to cover it up. The cabin owner comes out and see Charles reading about the Kodiak bear. He says the bear will kill you if it even looked at you. The ones that killed a man becomes a manhunter for the rest of its life. Bob comes complaining to Stephen that they need the shoes to be shined in a male native Indian for the photo shoot. Charles says that the inside of a banana peel can be good for shining shoes. They go inside to talk more and Stephen say that their native actor is sick and he couldn't make it. Bob sees the picture of Jack Huck and believes that they should shoot him. He goes to the cabin owner and asks where does he live and where can we find him. I need him for my photo shoot immediately. He answers he would likely be out hunting. The owner asks Charles if he spends much time in the woods. He replies most of his knowledge is theoretical. The owner goes on to say that it is a perfect spot. Charles says it's remote. To which the owner quickly agrees with him and opens up a chart on the table for Charles to see. He then goes into a business mumble saying that for only $30 or $40 million and Charles interrupts him and got up and walked away. saying he thought he was being courteous for a moment there. In the cabin, Bob tells Mickey that he should shooting that native Indian and is preparing to leave for his cabin. Charles walks in and Mickey sees he doesn't like himself. She proposes that Charles would go with Bob on an impromptu adventure. 2 hours tops. They would look for that Indian. Mickey's asks Charles to go. It would be good for him to go and get some air under his wings. Charles sees the cabin owner coming in and agrees to go, and they let with the amphibian. They flew for half an hour. When they docked, they called for the man but no one was home. Bob sees a note on the door saying, "Gone bear hunting in Big Base Lake." Bob asks the pilot. He says about 20 miles up north. Charles inspects a patch of dry grass and warns them to be careful. It's dead full. Bob asks what it's for. Charles replies, "It's a pit to catch bears." Bob asks Charles if they should be bold and press on to look for the Indian.
Charles agrees and Bob says there's the spirit that beat the Japanese. They continued on the amphibian. The pilot says he sees snow coming from the north on his radar. Bob asks Charles if he wants to tell him something, and Charles says if you like. He says he admired the way he took that joke last night with the bear. Handled it well. And embarrassing, but you handled it well.
It must be very tough for you, all that money, all the responsibility. Never knowing who your friends are, never knowing what people value you for. Charles agrees and smiles and says to never feel sorry for a man that owns a plane. Bob smiles too. He asks Bob what he values him for. And Bob says he likes his style and that your wife is kind of cute. Charles asks, "So how are you planning to kill me?" At the same moment, the pilot screams the F word and says to look out as they are about to fly straight into a flock of birds. The birds come rushing and breaks the front glass. Bird feathers blocks everyone's view in the plane. The front propeller gets clogged with birds. And the pilot cannot control the plane anymore. The steering is jammed. The plane loses altitude rapidly. They hit the tip of a mountain and head straight down. They reached a lake to attempt a crash landing. The plane gets smashed on the water with the passengers in it. The plane quickly sinks and becomes filled with water. Bob checks the pilot, but he is already dead. Stephen panics and starts to drown. Bob leaves him and goes up for air first. Charles rescues Stephen and both swim up for air. Charles's boat sinks with the plane. They swam towards land and Charles resuscitates Stephen, giving him mouth-to-mouth until he recovers and breathes. They are freezing and try to start a fire. The fire gets blown up by wind. Bob uses one of the emergency flares and uses it to start a fire. They made a big fire and kept themselves warm during the night. In the morning, Charles told Bob to not use any more flares to start a fire. He said they need lots of wood for a signaling fire when they come looking for us. Charles explains that people who gets lost die mostly of shame and not hunger or thirst. What did they do wrong? How could they have gotten into this mess? And Charles explains to the two of them where they are and that the mountain is what separates them from Jack Hawk's place. If they can move south of where they are by nightfall, they can use one of the flare and signal the search parties. Bob and Stephen fight over whose fault it was in the first place and Charles shuts the up. Charles uses a metal pin and a leaf to make a compass that points south. He points toward the mountain and says that is where we need to go. Bob doubts his method and says the mountain doesn't feel south. Charles says it is south and starts walking and Stephen follows. Bob comes too. They walked into the forest for hours. They reach a clean stream of water where they drank. Whilst resting, Bob asks Charles why he asked on the plane how he would be planning to kill him. And Charles answers for Mickey. Bob gets angry, says he won't and that the rich really are different. They keep talking about old Indian remedies for medicine. As they made jokes and cheered up, Stephen hears something and tells everyone to be quiet. They looked around for a while and then they saw it. A gigantic beast walks out of the woods to show itself. A wild Kodiak bear. They froze in fear and looked at it, remembering not to panic and make loud sound. Charles tells the two to slowly walk out of there. Then they ran like crazy into the forest. They stopped to catch their breaths, but the bear caught up quickly and they kept on running. They ran down a hill and meets a fast-flowing river. Charles says they'll never make a jump and looks around for a solution. He tells them to pull up a large deadwood to make a bridge. The three lifted it up on the count of 3 and they threw it over. They made a bridge to cross. The bear is coming downhill fast. Stephen crosses and waits for the two. Bob comes over and tells Charles to hurry and be careful. The bear caught up and starts rocking the dead log. Charles loses balance and falls into the river. Bob heroically jumps down and saves him just before he gets over the edge. The bear growls in anger and walks off to find another way to cross. Charles says to Bob that he saved his life. Bob says buy something nice when we get home. They reach the mountain. Bob says we go to the top of that rise and start a signal fire. Stephen asks are they coming to look for us? Bob replies, our friend here is a billionaire. You know what happens when you misplace one, and the three laughs. Charles stands high to take in the beautiful wild. They made a fire at night to keep themselves warm. The next day, nothing shows up, no signs of helicopters. Charles says let's go and walks off. The two follows and they walk down the mountain. When they reach the lake, they found out that they came back to the same place they left yesterday. Bob becomes angry and threw Charles's pin away. Steven starts to panic and yells that they are going to die out here and that no one is coming for us. Charles calms him down. He tells him to stop and gives him his pocket knife and tells him to make a spear for fishing. He assures Steven that even if no one comes looking, they will walk out of here alive. Bob asks if anyone is going to come look for Charles because he is important. Charles snaps back, asks if he wants them to lie and die here. Bob apologizes. Steven suddenly shouts for help and the two rushes to him. Steven has cut himself very deeply on his leg with the knife. Charles ties the wound with his scarf as tight as he possibly could to stop the bleeding. He tells Bob to bury the blood in the forest and quickly make a fire. At night they keep the flames of the fire going. Charles makes a shelter with wood. Steven tells him that he is a very thoughtful man and he appreciates him and thanks him. Charles goes to Bob and they make jokes and Bob tells him that he is different from the other billionaires and that he is starting to loosen up. A few hours later, it started to rain heavily. They cuddle up inside the small shelter. Bob and Charles discusses Steven's chances of survival. Charles says it is very good. He will make it. Then Charles sees the blood-soaked cloth he told Bob to bury. It was hanging on top of the tree branch, which would indicate that Bob didn't bury it. Charles says, I told you to bury that. It puts the smell of blood in the air. While Bob and Charles are arguing, Steven hears a growl behind him and looks. It was the big giant bear. It came running out of the woods towards Steven.
It comes and bites Steven on the leg ferociously. It lifts him from his leg and swings him back and forth. Charles comes running towards the bear and grabs a flaming stick. He distracts the bear. It stands and Charles falls to the ground. Steven screams and cries. The bear stands and Charles falls and Bob comes and helps. Bob pulls Charles out and the two runs into the dark. The bear turns to Steven and finishes him. The two ran into the darkness. It snowed in the morning and the two cuddles for warmth. They made a fire. Charles makes a trap to capture squirrels out of bush materials. The two watched soundlessly from afar while a squirrel gets caught, and they cheered and ran to it. Bob hears something and tells Charles to keep quiet. They stayed quiet, and then a helicopter swoops over them. They too ran as fast while they could shouted for the helicopter. The helicopter goes noticing nothing. They ran until they come across a clearing. Bob runs faster trying to signal it, but it got away so fast and Bob falls. Charles makes a joke as Bob lays on the ground. Bob gets infuriated. He gets up and gave all sorts of insults towards Charles. He then cries and asks if they are not going to come back. Charles says no, they've scouted this area and they are moving on. Charles tells him that doesn't make a difference. They're getting out even if they're going to walk out. Bob recovers from his brief depression and gets up and the two walk out of there. They walked on into the snow, into the woods. They reached a small stream and Charles says he can try to fish. Bob asks what are they going to use for bait. Charles breaks a part of his pocket watch's chain and says it's gold. Wouldn't you find that attractive? Bob says not right now. Charles tells him to rest and gather some wood. He pulls some wool from his clothes and makes a line and ties it to the broken chain to fish. As he is trying to catch a fish, he looks up to his surprise, finds the grizzly looking right at him, not making a sound. As he stands, the grizzly runs for him. He also runs. The gigantic bear uproots trees as it tries to catch up to Charles. Charles creeps under some dead trees where the bear cannot fit in. He gets up and runs. He reaches Bob while he is making a big fire. He tells Bob that it's a man killer. It's been stalking us the entire time. They throw flaming woods around them and make a flaming circle to protect themselves. The fire burns so bright in the dark at night. The bear stalks them from a distance in the dark. They cannot go anywhere. Bob asks what are they going to do now. Charles says they're going to starve up here. We have no choice but to kill him to survive. In the morning, they pick up the broken trees to make really sharp spears. Charles explains from the matchbox that we are going to attack him by using his own weight to kill him, similar to the deadfall. We are going to use our blood to lure him out with blood. Charles cuts his thumb and rubs his blood on a small cloth and shows Bob. Charles says that Maasai boys in Africa, 11 years old, can kill a lion with only spears. What one man can do, another can do. Bob disagrees and says the bear is smart and is always ahead of us. In fact, he is stalking us right now. Do you want to die? Charles says no, he is going to kill the bear. The two became empowered to do so. They rubbed blood on a piece of cloth and let the wind blow off the smell into the woods. The two waited patiently for the man-killing machine to come out. They waited in fear until it came out. The bear growled angrily at the two and kept moving towards them. They kept backing up until the bear come to a marked spot marked by his sticks. The bear stepped on the X and the Charles says now. Bob releases a lever and the two ducked on the ground, and an enormous swinging trap with very sharpened logs swings with force, but misses the bear. The two ran for their lives. They jumped down a steep but soft incline that hurt like hell. The two lands in the water, got up and ran. The bear slowly makes it down the slope and Sun's at full speed after them. They both grab the sharp wooden spears that they made and made their stand. They attack the bear or the bear will kill them. It was futile and they fail again and again to slay the beast with their spears. The bear growled so low that scared Bob. They didn't give up their effort. Bob's spear broke and he got another one. The bear stood up on 2 feet and punches Charles to the ground. Bob sticks it. The bear hit Bob as well that sent him across the air. It attacks Bob while he was down. Charles comes to his aid and charges the bear with another wooden spear. It followed Charles to where it nearly killed him but proved otherwise. Charles uses the bear's own weight to drive the wooden spear into its heart. The two sighed in relief after the bear died instantly. They cooked some of the bear and made bear claw necklaces. They laughed and made jokes. Charles breaks his watch and took out the minute hand and rubs it to make another compass to know which way is south. The two saw the way south and walked on with bear skin on their backs. The two come across a deserted cabin and felt relieved. As Bob walked ahead, Charles notices a deadfall covered by snow. The cabin was empty, and they searched for essentials. Charles gets a match and pot to boil water. Bob finds a rifle with 2 boxes of ammo. They check the canoe, and it floats. The two rejoiced as they will float down the river towards civilization. Bob wants to make tea, and the two goes back into the house. Charles makes a fire with the match and takes out his knife, and a paper fell out of the case that is a receipt made for the purchase, an engraving of a knife, and a pocket watch which is what got for his birthday. But it also shows another pocket watch engraved that says to Bob from Mickey, for all the nights. He then realizes that Bob was actually indeed been sleeping with his wife and that she made him this pocket watch. While Bob checks the gun, Charles asks him for his pocket watch if he could see it. Bob says it's broken and it's useless. He starts loading the rifle with bullets, and Charles says you don't need me anymore, right? You can find your own way out of here. Charles says you don't have any business with that broad anyway. Everybody knows she married you for your money. And Bob tells Charles to go outside or I'm going to shoot you. The two remaining survivor becomes enemies. Bob brings Charles out of the house and starts telling him to turn around so he can shoot him in the back. Charles asks if it was from the first day they got together. Bob hesitates to kill him and keeps shouting for him to turn around. Charles says wait and moves forward to Bob. Bob steps back and suddenly falls into the bear trap. Charles knew it from the start and was smart enough to lead him to the trap. Bob was severely injured and was crying out loud. A big wooden spike lunged into his left thigh and bleeding heavily from it. He calls out to Charles for help. Charles got down into the hole and grabbed his gun and pointed it at him. Bob begs him not to shoot. Charles emptied and threw away the gun. He tied his leg with his belt and carried him into the house. He threw him onto the table and clears it. He gave him some more alcohol and tries to stop his bleeding, but he cried out because of the pain and goes into shock. Bob has no choice but to get him quickly to a hospital, so they left immediately on the canoe. Charles keeps paddling with Bob lying in it. They paddled downstream to find where the rescue team would be. As they paddled, Bob says to Charles he doesn't really feel quite 100%. Charles says he is going to get them to shore to rest. Charles makes a big fire to warm Bob as he starts to feel coldness all over his body. Charles lies there and asks him why would he want to save a piece of shit like him. He says he likes the challenge. Bob says no, you never had a buddy. Now, I am your pet project. The guy who tried to kill you. Charles says you wouldn't have done it. Bob says that he is dying, so Charles comes and sit down beside him. Bob asks him what he will do when he get back. I have nothing else to go back to. Bob says he doesn't feel sorry for him. Never feel sorry for a guy who owns a plane. Bob tells him to listen closely and says he is very sorry for everything he has done to him, for his wife and trying to kill him. He says that he is very sorry and Charles says don't die on me. Then Charles hears something and goes up to see. To his surprise, there is a helicopter. It was the search party looking for them. It seems they haven't spotted them yet and are about to leave. So he tries to shout and wave his coat in the air to signal them. He then cuts off green leaves from a nearby shrub and burns it in the fire to create smoke. The helicopter is still leaving, and then it turns around and heads to their direction, and Charles rejoices. The helicopter swoops above them and turns to land. Charles calls for Bob to see and looks back to see that his friend has already passed on. He holds him to see if he is still alive, but he doesn't move. Charles feels very sad. The helicopter brings him back home where everyone is waiting. The local police, the media, and his wife, who is saddened to see Bob didn't make it. Charles hugs his wife and hands her Bob's watch. She knows that he knows. Bob tells the media that all his friends died saving his life, and that he is unendingly grateful and he regrets he could never repay them as they are gone forever. Hello guys. Please be one of the first 100 people to subscribe to my channel, as I will be uploading new content each week. Thanks for watching, and leave comments to show how I can improve my videos.